First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up this afternoon. I'd also like to thank Isokinetics. And I need to let you know that I'm a little bit of an anomaly up here. I've been called a one-off over here, and I hope I have this right. I think that means that I think a little bit differently than normal. I hope it doesn't mean that I'm crazy. All right. So one should combine land with aquatic exercises using specialized training gear that is both safe and highly effective. And you must properly apply scientific principles, including hydrodynamics and, of course, biomechanics, if you want to really derive the types of outcomes that you have. Most of you already know this, but I think that sometimes we forget that very basic idea. My emphasis is on running in water with appropriate technique as the home exercise. And I suggest that that probably comes from my background as a runner and as a track and field coach more so, but also from my biomechanics background, and just as importantly, the broad-ranging sports science implications that are related to that. I also use a wide variety of different exercises and different kinds of equipment, including medicine balls, physio balls, rubber kettlebells, SAQ-related drills, neuromuscular coordination drills, plyos, etc., in and out of the water. I'm very much into the idea of amphibious training. My second emphasis then is to use the specialized training and rehab gear, example AQX, which is gear that I have actually designed. This provides proper and adequate buoyancy, which I'll cover a little bit more later, and the shoes that won't slip on the deck or on a pool bottom, and more importantly to me, they also provide an increase in the work production. To emphasize proper deep water running and shallow water running gait patterns will best mimic what should happen on land. I need to have everyone try to get away from the concept of just doing a high knee, aqua stepping, aqua marching, or biking, or whatever you'd like to call it, but as a coach, as a biomechanist, it is not running. The specificity of training principles suggests that that gait pattern of running in the water should be closely aligned with whatever you see in a terrestrial setting, and then thus maximize the benefit back to the athlete. In a 2006 study that I conducted, this is actually out of my doctoral research, I did a kinematic comparison of deep water running styles where I actually looked at the cross-country or open gait pattern, which is more appropriate, in my opinion, relative to the overall gait cycle that uses more hamstring activation versus a stereotypical gait pattern of more of a high knee, stair-stepping like approach, which is very hip flexor dominant. I used both shoes and barefoot, and we conducted our testing at 60 to 65% of their land-based VO2 max at steady state. And what I came up with, and this is kind of an atypical way of looking at this, but this is an XY plot of the ankle joint as it goes through one gait cycle. On the far left, you can see that's land-based running. You can see the flat spot over on the right-hand side of that pane. And as you move back to the stereotypical elliptical version, you can see the horizontal displacement of that ankle going through its range of motion. The middle figure represents cross-country style deep water running. As you can tell, you definitely match very closely the range of motion that you would see on land. Likewise, if you look to the far right, that is what it looks like when you do a high knee stair-stepping approach. So to me, it's somewhat similar to saying that you're going to do a clean and jerk in a weight room and only doing part of that movement, only doing a hang clean as an example. What I've done here is to put videos, and I knocked on wood that they would actually work today, the videos on top of those same panes so that you can look at that type of a style of deep water running. And if we really want to maximize our rehabilitation back, this is one way that we can do that, by making sure that we attend to that fuller range of motion rather than just a stair-stepping like action. That's not to say that we can't make those kinds of adjustments as necessary. For example, in an ACL reconstruction, we may not want that much range of motion just yet until their pain tolerance would allow that, but definitely you can get to that. So the take-home message out of that was no statistical difference found between land and cross-country deep water running relative to the ankle displacement and thus the range of motion. The high knee represents only one part of that complete gait cycle. The stride rate using that cross-country style is about 60% of what you would find on land at submaximal levels, which was that 60 to 65% of their VO2 max. and no statistical difference was found relative to the heart rate at that level. The current cadence charts that have been used for workloads are actually inappropriate. They are based on nothing but that high knee style. Furthermore, the RPE values that have been reported are about 1 to 3 points higher in deep water running. To me, that's likely reflective of a shift in glycolytic properties, more so away from the oxidative metabolism, simply because we have lesser trained muscle groups. In water, we cannot generate the momentum that we can on land. When we hit land and we're in part of the swing phase, we obviously only have gravity to deal with, whereas in the water, due to hydrodynamics, we have drag that we need to put up with. Importantly, regular practice of proper water technique will yield enhanced effects in both the conditioning and the rehab of injuries. What I have found with our case studies is that we will get people through that process much faster because they won't have a learning curve if they already have been exposed to deep water running, shallow water running, and the related drills that we use. Next, why wear shoes in water training at all? Our research in a post-testing Likert scale of 1 to 5, with 5 strongly agree, or very strongly agree rather, we found that wearing shoes while using this cross-country style of running felt the most like real running to the athletes that were involved in that study. That is what gave me the idea to start thinking about how could we do a better job then of actually harnessing the power of the pool. Based on that scale and the related feedback then, I've developed a shoe that actually adds accommodating resistance due to drag via scoops on both sides of the shoe. There's a picture of that. A recent study was conducted at BYU using the Aquatic training shoe on a HydroWorks underwater treadmill, and their take-home message out of that was that wearing the shoes while on that underwater treadmill would increase oxygen consumption by 4.12 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute at any given water treadmill speed. Obviously, statistically significant. In 2008, we did a data collection and analysis on 8 male NCAA Division III championship caliber runners, and what we looked at was the barefoot versus wearing our AQX shoe in deep water running as compared to treadmill running. The protocol was very involved. It took a treadmill VO2 max first, followed by a treadmill submax, which was conducted at 60 to 70% of their VO2 max for 30 minutes. That was followed by an in-pool session where they did a barefoot deep water running trial for 30 minutes at the same submaximal level as you would find on the treadmill. And then finally, we took that cadence that they exhibited during the barefoot trial and made them hit that cadence with the shoes on to give us a clean, appropriate way to compare the shoe versus running barefoot in the water. I should also let you know that all of the subjects had to have completed deep water running sessions on a minimum of 6 months, 2 to 3 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes at a time under surveillance to make sure that they were doing those correctly. Once again, what came out of that was the non-significant variable was heart rate, which is an interesting thing to consider when people get too focused on that in the pool, I think. But furthermore, caloric expenditure, VO2, RPE, RER, and stride rate were all statistically significantly different. One of the take-homes out of this is that the yellow diamonds that you see, or triangles that you see here, what you see is that is the person wearing the shoes. The blue section is the treadmill running, which obviously you see that once they get into their steady state, they maintain that throughout. And then lastly, the red portion is running barefoot in the water. And what you can see is that there definitely was a significant increase in that energy expenditure due to wearing those shoes. The RPE, also we found the values there were also 1 to 3 higher than what you would have found in normal treadmill running. The shod compared to treadmill yields very small differences, which is an indication that the shoes may help to better match land-based running. Stride rate was 63% of the land-based stride rate with a range of 51 to 71%. And to me, that means you must individualize their stride rate in the water if you want to maximize what that workload will be for them. It's a very simple thing to do. You just take their stride rate from land, and then you'll take whatever, plug in whichever number you'd like, 60% of that or 70% or whatever, and then you will match that in the water. And at the submaximal level, what you'll find is that their heart rate will match almost identically with what it would have on land if you do that. Now, the next thing to look at is buoyancy and where on the body it is actually placed. It has huge effects on our ability to kinematically adjust in the water and actually produce what we're after. This is especially true in athletes, as you are well aware. So I designed an original AQX zero-gravity buoyancy suit that had those ideas in mind, and realizing that in order for us to produce that kind of a buoyant effect, I needed to provide a lot of the dense material down near the center of mass, which once you do that, that allows the person to breathe. Once they get into a neutral position with their head, it allows for better posture in the water, and then overall, kinematically, everything falls into place. It's a picture of, sort of looks like an Oompa Loompa suit. It's kind of large around. My wife gave me quite a bit of grief because it has quite a bit of buoyancy around the derriere. Bye. This is a video of a tethered, I'm pretty sure you can recognize who this is, tethered person with the buoyancy suit on and using the cross-country style of deep water running with the shoes. Then it breaks away to the shallow water running, and as you can tell, this is not just looking at a high-knee version. It's not just the drive phase of what you would normally see on land. It actually goes through that complete hamstring range of motion, which with soccer players in particular with such a high risk of injury to the hamstring, I think could be fairly profound. In a recent study using both the AQX shoes and buoyancy suit, we actually did a plyometric study on American football players. And what we looked at was one land group, one aquatic group with no specialized gear, and then one group wearing our gear. There was an increase in the power production for all of the groups, although it wasn't statistically significant. However, it is important to note that the AQX group increased the most in terms of their vertical jump by over about 3/4 of an inch. The no AQX group in the water was significantly less in terms of a practical setting of about 1/4 of an inch, and then on land about 1/2 of an inch. This corroborates evidence that was previously reported in similar studies looking at the differences between aquatic and land plyometric training. Commonly reported statements about my joints don't hurt like on land, and actually that's exactly why I chose to look at American football players. They were actually linemen, and our linemen tend to carry, let's just say, a bit of non-effective mass, which is a polite way of saying fat. And so by doing that, I know that they are carrying around that extra mass, and by nature they have more problems with their knees, more problems with their back, and so on. We can use this in preseason to decrease muscular soreness as well and still conduct regular plyometrics and increase power, which is one of the main reasons for doing plyometrics. It also enhances the rehab and the conditioning protocol options that you might have. And as an aside, and there are plenty of anecdotal kinds of cases that we can relate, but as an aside, our decathletes, we typically would start them in the pool with any of their plyometric training for a good 4 to 6 weeks before allowing them to do any of that on land. And because of that, our common numbers about shin splints, quote unquote shin splints, were significantly lower than what you would hear from many of the other track and field programs. The next study that we're looking at is longer training period. We only had 4 weeks in which to do that last training. And then also to use fast versus slow aquatic plyos. And what I mean by that is that most people in the water, when they take off and do their loading, what will happen is that the buoyant effect of water will take over and allow them to kind of just float a little bit. And what I have encouraged athletes to do is actually forcefully get their feet back down to the bottom of the pool faster, because I think that in the long term, the overall benefit will be much greater because of that. The neuromuscular component will elevate. But we'll have to prove it. So lastly, the incorporation of quality water training to any program can lead to a decrease in the incidence rate of injuries, as well as increased strength, power, dynamic flexibility, coordination, endurance, decrease the time needed for rehab, and so forth. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. Can I make it? Ooh.
Good time.